Hi, welcome to this build series I'm doing about the TDR2. Firstly, thank you for watching. And what I hope to achieve with this is just a few tips and tricks, taking you through the build. Maybe there are some guys that are deciding on the heli and they're not too sure about the build. Maybe there's someone that says they don't want the heli, but they want to see what it's like to build it. So hopefully I can give you guys some indication of what it's like to build one of these, and also hopefully a few pointers along the way with the TDR2. What I want to start with is the actual ordering process of a TDR. Everywhere I read up, it starts with you sending an email to Jan Henselite requesting that you want to order one of them. Then hopefully within 2 to 3 weeks they'll respond saying that they've put you onto a waiting list. Once you're on the waiting list, they will let you know as soon as a kit is ready. This takes another few months as far as I could deduct from the posts I've read so far. And if they eventually let you know that your kit is ready, they'll send you an order form. At that stage you tell them exactly what you want. So you've got the kit, and then there's a few extra parts like the carbon fiber versus the normal fiberglass canopy. You can order a specific Contronic 200 ESC, which has been slightly modified for this heli. You can order a pyro motor, and there's a few pinion choices and small little items that you can order. So after you've placed your order, they'll send you their details either by bank wire transfer or PayPal. I opted for the PayPal option. And then once you've paid, they'll send you the tracking number and the heli shipped out, and you can expect it within another 2 weeks, I would say. So when I initially decided I wanted to order one of these, I fully prepared myself for a few month waiting period, 3 to 4 months at the very least. What actually happened is vastly different. I got up one Saturday morning and I decided that's the day I'm going to order it. So got online, sent them an email, and the Monday or the Tuesday I received a mail back. So that's within 1 to 2 business days actually. And that email stated that they've got kits available, so they can send me the order form if I want one. I responded to the email saying yes. I received the order form. I ordered the parts that I wanted and sent the order form back to them. They responded with an invoice. I paid the invoice via PayPal, and the next day I received the tracking number. The heli was shipped and the heli got delivered 2 to 3 weeks later. So this whole process for me, from the day that I sent the email saying I wanted to order one, took less than 4 weeks. I think it was actually 3 weeks, and the heli was delivered and in my hands. So hugely impressed, pleasantly surprised actually by how quickly I managed to get hold of one of them, and I'm of course very, very happy about that. The other thing I want to take you guys through before I start is just some of the tools that I've used. And the first one is the circlip plier. It's a really cheap one. It's a horrible tool to say the least. But I didn't want to buy an expensive one. There's 2 circlips that I had to mount. I'll show you guys just now. But this tool is really bad. It's got a it sounds great on the packaging. You can mount different bits on here. It can open circlips, it can close them, but it's in practice just terrible. But it served its purpose, and without one of these, I would say it's not impossible, but it's near impossible without damaging your rotor head to actually install the circlips. And the reason I say that is, if I just quickly go to the part where the circlips are installed, this tool actually goes into 2 little holes in that circlip. And what then happens is you close the tool, which then takes that circlip and it closes it. And you then install it inside your rotor head, and there are small little ridges in there. And as soon as you let go of it, it seats itself in those ridges and it can't move in or out. And it can move with a little bit of pressure. It can actually turn in a circle. The problem with this specific tool is, and I'm sure other cheap ones, that if I actually put some force, you can see that I can bend these forks apart. And these circlips are made of steel, and they've got enough force on them to actually push this. So what happens when you close that circlip with a tool is it actually kind of does this with a circlip, so it kind of like bends it off center. So really not a great tool. I don't want to spend too much time on it. So if you get a cheap one, just be cautious with it, because it can actually, as it bends those apart, the circlip just jumps off and flies one way. So be careful. I didn't want to get an expensive one. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's a bad tool, but it did its work. The other tools is my balling pliers. In the past, before I actually got this one, I used this as a flat nose pliers, because I've got another pair of flat nose pliers, but they have ridges on the inside of its nose, or on the inside of each of these plier sides. And those ridges tend to scratch stuff. So then I eventually went and got myself a proper one, and I love this one. I'm sure others are just as good, but the size is just perfect for me. I can grab any nut. If I can't get a normal wrench in there, then I can grab it with these pliers, and if it slips, it doesn't actually scrape the nuts or scratch anything. So really a nice handy tool to have. The balling pliers also, I'll show you guys later on how I actually used it to clamp onto two ball links that had to screw into a threaded stud in the middle, and you can actually turn it like this. I'll show you guys when I get there. So yeah, these are the only three tools. Again, this is a cheapie. I hate this tool, but it did its job. And then these two pliers and the normal hex drivers, but that's standard across any other heli assembly. So as far as the manual goes, they send you the manual as soon as you've paid for your order. So I went through the manual. One of the big secrets in it is, and they mention it, that they say read through it before you start the build, and especially each section. So I'm going to take literally the first part of the build, which is this section. Read through this whole section and then start the assembly. Some of these sections are 2 pages long. Read through the 2 pages and then go back and actually start the assembly, because these contain a lot of tips and tricks and very specific stuff that needs to be done when assembling that component. The second thing is, when I initially went through the manual, the heli seems very complicated, to the point where I posted online that it seems overcomplicated. I understand this is a high quality heli, it is purpose built, it's an amazing machine. I do not question the quality of it. It was just very complicated. Simply, if I just show you the size of the manual, it is massive compared to any other manual I've ever seen of a heli. But once I received the kit and I started the build, and to the point where I'm now, it's honestly one of the easiest helis I've ever built. And the big secret to that is, if I turn to this page over here, just bear with me for 2 seconds. This sentence says there is no need for you to check the pre-assembled parts or to disassemble or tighten them. Meaning that every part that comes in the kit that is pre-assembled is properly pre-assembled. I can attest to that. I've looked at every single pre-assembled part. I checked all of the nuts. I didn't actually check them with a tool. I checked if they had Loctite on them, because you can, if you look closely, you can see the Loctite. All of them were Loctited. All of the parts moved perfectly. So the manual says don't check them. I visually inspected them. I saw no problem with them. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that you do not need to disassemble any of the pre-assembled parts. Again, this heli's quality is immaculate, so the pre-assembled parts carries the same quality with them. They are assembled properly, and there's no need to disassemble them or to tighten the bolts. So if we move on to the first section, the pre-assembled parts are mentioned nowhere, and I didn't find anything online, so I didn't know which of the parts were pre-assembled, and that's where the actual build of this heli becomes easy. A lot of it is pre-assembled. This part, for instance, pre-assembled. I know this is not a hard part, but it's pre-assembled to the point where there's been drive fluid gear lube has been applied to it. so nothing for you to do. We get to the rotor head, you install a circlip, you apply gear loop to the dampeners, you slide them in, you slide in that section in the middle, and it's a pretty standard rotor head as far as the dampeners go. The only difference is this section in the middle here. There is a slot at the top here, and this section in the middle has got holes in it. So if you insert a tool from the top, they mention a 3mm tool, you are actually able to insert it straight into one of the holes and turn it ever so slightly. And then pull the tool out, push it in again, and turn it again. What that does is, it squeezes, if you look at this section, if this is turned, one of these rings, if you turn it one way, this one will be pushed out that way, and that ring will be pushed out that way. What that does is it pushes against the dampeners, and those dampeners are seated against these circlips. So it actually squeezes the dampeners against each other, and when they squeeze against each other, they push harder against your rotor head, which means your dampening hardens. So extremely clever idea of softening and hardening your dampener at the field without actually opening your rotor head. So the more you turn it, the harder your dampening is going to become, and you can adjust it to whatever you feel like. So this is a pretty standard assembly, nothing too hard about it. Just check these little nuts must be seated properly. There are grooves for them once you've slid it in, but there's nothing hard about it, and it's a pretty standard rotor head otherwise. The next part we get to is the blade grips. Again, pretty standard in my opinion. Most helis I've worked on looks almost exactly like this, with a few washers maybe swapping places, but you've got a washer, you've got a bearing which goes into your blade grip. On the other side you've got your thrust bearing, you've got a washer, a bearing, and a little washer again, and this bolt that screws into your feathering shaft. So pretty standard, you screw them on. The only thing is these bearings, those ones over there, don't fit in straight from the front. There's a little groove, you won't be able to see it, but there's a little groove, so you have to kind of push the bearing in skew, and then using this tool that they've given you in the kit, you flip the bearing up straight, and then you seat it against that washer. Nothing too hard, but yeah, so again, pretty standard in my mind. If we quickly have a look at that, let me just go through the next part. I assembled my pitch arms. I'm building this machine, I've got enough helis that I can fly 3D with. I'm building this machine purely for speed. I'm not even going to put on symmetrical blades. I'm going to use asymmetrical, which is better for speed flying as far as I hear. And you can move these pitch arms on the blade grips up and down. This hole is not round, it's slightly oval, so you can actually slide that arm up and down. And the further you slide it down means that when your swash and your links and everything is in their neutral position, this blade grip actually stands at an angle of positive 4 degrees, which means when you go to the maximum positive of, for example, 13 degrees, that one will sit another 4 degrees above it, which gives you a total travel of 17 degrees positive on this blade grip. So I've mounted those of mine in that position. I have not put in my blade bolts, I've not put in these washers because I haven't decided on the exact blades I'm going to use. So if you use blades that are quite wide at the root, you'll put the washers on the outside with those little bushes. If you're using thinner blades, you'll put washers on the inside with the bushes that goes through them, and then the thinner blades will be clamped by those two washers. So that's it in essence for the rotor head. The quality of the parts, like I said, is amazing. Definitely, I've built 3 other helis. The best so far. I'm really impressed with the quality of every single bolt that is used on here. The little markings, everything is just really, really well done on this heli. This is just your pitch control arms. So here we get to one of the first parts that are pre-assembled. This part comes pre-assembled. The only thing is this little washer over here is loose in the packet. You'll put it on later. I'll show you just now when we get there. So there's nothing for you to do here. All of them have been Loctited, everything has been checked, so nothing to do here. The same goes for the swash, pre-assembled to the point where you don't even have to apply gear loop onto that ball. It's been done for you. Loctite has been put on in all of the places. This swash plate fork, or the swash dog as I've heard it called as well, pre-assembled. There's nothing for you to do here. This auto rotation gear pre-assembled, again nothing to do. There's even grease inside this one-way bearing, so I didn't have to install any grease. This shaft and pinion pre-assembled, nothing to do there. This is the first section where you're going to put some parts together. Those bearings are already in the main bearing blocks, those as well. So all you do is you slide that shaft through that bottom. This is the bottom bearing, so you slide it through there, through a washer, through the auto rotation gear, through that washer, and into this belt pulley. And then you set the grub screw. It's got a flat section over there, so they've got a little warning that it needs to be seated onto that. Then you slot in this main gear into that bearing. You put the two washers on. That's the one washer that was loose with this one in a packet. It goes through there, and that's it. That's this assembly. So literally you just take these parts and you slot them together. Here we're going to add some screws. So these 4 screws and those 5 at the bottom don't have Loctite on them, or you don't need to put Loctite on them. Jan's reasoning in his manual is that there's, firstly, the torque these screws have against this washer and the carbon fiber plate means that the chances of it unscrewing itself to vibrations are minimal. And if one managed to unscrew itself, there are enough other bolts to actually hold this whole mainframe rigid. If you do put on Loctite, the chances of you stripping out those hex bolts are quite high. And those are all per the points he mentioned in his manual. And I agree with all of them. In the past, on my helis, if I apply Loctite onto these and I try and get them out after a crash, I've stripped out, I would say, close on 20 of these bolts in different assemblies. And it's a nightmare then to get it out. I've got a little file that I actually file a little flat a hole in there so that I can get a flat screwdriver in. And then I use a heat gun to actually heat this part up so the Loctite gives that little bit easier. And then I use a flat screwdriver to quickly untwist it. It's a huge headache, so I fully trust when he says there's no Loctite required, and I've built mine the same way. The only ones where you do put Loctite are these 3 over here and obviously on the other side. This assembly, when you put it together, none of these screws must be tightened. You first just screw them in so you can slightly wiggle it, and then once everything wiggles, you start tightening them across on each side so they start seating together properly. What they then tell you to do is to grab the heli by the main shaft and pull it vertically in and out. And what that does is it shows you if there's any play between the bottom bearing plate, the main gear, and the top one. And I had about 0.2 millimeters of play. So if you've got play, they tell you to loosen these 4 bolts over here and the other 4 on the other side. And then you pull out this block and you put in a shim, a 0.2 millimeter shim. So I put in the shim and then I slid this block back in. And then carefully you check if these bolts still perfectly align up with the holes in the bearing block, because if the shim is too much, then the bearing block won't go all the way in and the screws will have to kind of slant their way into it, which is going to strip out and damage your bearing blocks. So just be careful with that. But mine, I put in a 2mm shim, my bolts perfectly lined up, and there's absolutely no play in mine at this stage. What I then did was, it wasn't mentioned in here, but I then took my heli. It's going to be hard with the skids on now, but I took it like this and I moved this auto rotation gear the same way, pushed and pulled it up and down, and it also had a bit of play. So again, I took off the top bearing plate, and if I just go 2 pages back, if I hold it like this, that's in essence that exploded VUC, and this is the top plate that you take off. So those are the standard washers. So on each of these shafts, that one and that one, I added a 0.2 millimeter shim. And then I tightened this block back down, and again my bolts all seated perfectly, and there is no play in these now. And I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, but if I hold onto this pinion shaft, this one over here, and I move the main one, there's a perfect amount of mesh between my 2 gears. So I'm really happy with how that came out. The next bit is assembling the skid mount at the bottom. That's quite quick and easy with these little bearing mounts on the side. Creating your ESC mounting plate, that's quick and easy. Then you mount your ESC to it. I don't have an ESC yet. As a matter of fact, I have none of my electronics at this stage yet. I haven't decided on my ESC and motor. I've decided on my servos, but I've not purchased any of this, so I didn't do this section. I did, however, assemble this little bit over here. This part comes pre-assembled, so all I did was I actually visually inspected that there was a washer wherever they said there are washers. You can quite clearly see them again if you look closely. This thing moves perfectly. Everything was perfect in this, so I could see that there was Loctite used. If you look at the bottom up, you can see a slight bluish tint where the Loctite is on the bolt. So pre-assembled, nothing for you to do here. You then take these two carbon plates and your tail boom support mounts, that's the top part of them. Screw it in with 3 screws on each side, 2 screws on that side, 2 on that side, and then this tail belt guide goes in with the 2 bolts over there. No Loctite on any of these. Again, he says if you're going to turn them out and they've got Loctite on, you'll strip out the heads and it'll be a nightmare to get them out of the heli. I did, however, put Loctite on those 2 where they go into that tail guide. Then you just put the piece into your main frame and you tighten it up with 5 bolts on each side. Nothing special about that. You attach your skids, and this is your tail redirection guide for your servo coming in on the one side and your push rod going out to your tail on the other. This is pre-assembled. The only specific bits you have to assemble is that screw into this ball with its spacer. So Loctite that one, this ball link, Loctite it, and create this little ball link over here. Now this is the one where I mentioned earlier I used these 2 tools. So if you look here, you get a 12mm M2.5 stud bolt, and on each end goes one of these ball links. So I started screwing it in by hand and it got tight, and then eventually I took very thick tools and I inserted them through the ball links, one on each side, and using the 2 tools I turned them to tighten up this ball link. But then I noticed that I'm going to damage the inside of my ball links. So that's when I started using the flat nose pliers, and I gripped it like that on the one side, and I used my ball link pliers on the other side with that flat bit over there, and I gripped it on the other side, and I actually started turning it in, and it worked perfectly. So with the one, if you can imagine that with this one I'm holding on to that end, and then with this one I take it and I just turn it and I turn it and I turn it. It worked out really well and it didn't damage this ball link, but I can promise you now this gets really tight because you have to go in all the way. I don't know if you are able to see, but basically these 2 parts go in and touch each other. So yeah, use flat nose pliers there, otherwise you could damage those 2 ball links. The next step is then putting in that redirection arm, tighten it with 1 bolt over there, put in these 2 little servo mounts, and then install your servo. I haven't got my electronics yet, so obviously I haven't installed my servo, and that is as far as I am with my build. So I'm really happy with how the heli goes together. It's really exciting and the parts fit really well. They're all really well manufactured. The only other thing I can really show you guys is that the first day I got my heli, I had to do something and I couldn't assemble because I didn't have all my tools and stuff ready. So I installed this foil on my tail boom. And what they tell you to do in the manual is from the rear end, you measure in a specific distance and you put a piece of tape. And then from the bottom up, you measure and you put a piece of tape. So I did that beforehand. And then I took the 2 foils and I had someone hold the tail boom for me because it slips around. And I aligned, because the foil comes in 3 parts basically. It's wax paper with the foil on it and then a plastic layer over the top. So when you pull off the plastic layer, it actually takes the foil with it, and the wax paper is on one side. You can throw that away. So then that whole foil will stick to something. So it's got a black line on the side of the H for the Henselite helis. So I held it on one side and I lined it on the other side with my 2 pieces of tape I had here. And then I pressed on this side, and once it's seated, I just held it and I pushed it down, and it went down perfectly. I did this in under 5 minutes. I don't know if you guys will be able to see, but these letters don't line up 100% perfectly with each other, but they're so close that there's no way that if you look at the one side of the tail boom and the other side that you'll notice that they're off by that little bit. Also, they're not perfectly straight because the sticker or the foil, when it came, they cut it out into strips, and that strip wasn't actually perfectly aligned, and I didn't pick that up. But again, it's so close that I don't have any problem with it. It looks, if you quickly look at it, looks perfectly straight. You can't see that it's skew. So for a 5-minute job, I'm really happy with that. So yes, guys, I think the series is going to have about 3 to 4 videos. In the next video, I'll come back with the servo racks and stuff mounted. I hope to have my servos by then, and then we'll see how the build goes from there. But hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.